Hey, it's KR from D&D Homebrew, and as you can see, I'm in a new set of digs here. I've moved again the third time since I started this channel. I've moved. I have a kind of a smaller little studio here, but it's working so far. Today, I'm going to talk about how to use what used to be called crypto science, crypto history, whatever, but now with cryptocurrency. Although it's interesting because crypto kind of means fake, but some people say pseudoscience, pseudo history, pseudobiology, and these are sort of fake scientific theories that have abounded about mysterious phenomenon or little understood phenomenon. So a classic one is, aliens coming to Earth, aliens building the pyramids, right? The famous Inca line drawings in the desert when seen from above, they form animals. How could they have seen them? Well, aliens guided them. And they were landing strips, right? And the reason this comes up, I did this PDF for my Patreon on the Lost Patrol concept. And this is where, from ancient times, an army would go out into the field and just disappear into thin air, into the mist. The most famous in the Western world is the Lost Ninth Legion of Rome, disappeared in Britain. Literally, they would say they walked into a mist. Again, what the reality is, they were either slaughtered by various tribesmen in Scotland or Britain, but some say they just got lost in the, in terms of the history of this, and they actually went to Hispania, Spain, and weren't annihilated at all. But there's another one, Persian army, and I think like 250 BCE, also disappeared in a desert on a big campaign, all 50,000 soldiers. And the actuality of this is not as interesting as the concept that this whole troop of many thousands of soldiers could just march off and just disappear, right? Well, the thing about when you're running a fantasy RPG game is that first of all, you can use the ancient myths and legends. This is where a lot of monsters come from, right? They're the Chimera or Basilisk, or, you can go down the list, ghouls and whatnot. People thought ghouls really existed because oftentimes during plague times, people would go crazy. They were starving and they were eating bodies and they were, dead bodies, and they were really gaunt and their teeth were exposed. And this is where they think werewolves and things came from. But these explanations, these pseudoscientific, are, oh no, there is a virus of some kind that caused lycanthropy or something, right? Oh no, the aliens did build this. Because it is the opposite of Occam's razor. Occam's razor always says, when in doubt, go to the simplest explanation, which is somehow they built the pyramids, not space aliens, because you're introducing this space alien thing, right? But the opposite, the crypto-scientific view, is that, no, we go to the craziest, most outlandish answer of all. Well, that fits in with an RPG setting. So what happened to the Roman Ninth Legion? They stepped through a portal to another dimension and were gone forever. One moment they're there, then gone, right? Well, we have multiple planes and dimensions and pocket dimensions and all sorts of stuff in a fantasy RPG setting. Well, that makes perfect sense. So you say, okay, I'm going to use the Lost. This is what I did. I used the Lost Patrol trope, and I had them go into this dimension. And then you ask the question, since it's real, you start to get into scientific questions about where did they go, how did they survive, and if they should return, which is the premise I had in my story, what has happened to them? Because you have the issue here of they've gone to this dimension and come back. Is it like 1 second? Is it like 6 months? Is it like years? If they were there for 10 years, have they aged 10 years? And then suddenly they're brought back and going, wait a minute, I was completely settled. Or they have no memory of where they were and they seem to be just as though they left. The classic example of this, and one of the examples I used for the Lost Patrol, was Flight 19, a famous training mission, 1945 off the coast of Florida. All 5 planes, the Avenger torpedo bombers, and a float plane that looked for them, disappeared without a trace. And when I was a kid, this was used as evidence for the Bermuda Triangle, this area, triangle in the Caribbean that was noted for things disappearing and whatnot. Well, all areas are noted for disappearing. It didn't really stand up to any kind of true scientific scrutiny. But everybody had theories, and one of them was they went through a dimension, they were magnetic, there were sea spouts that came up and sucked them to the bottom. I mean, there was all these crazy theories, when in fact, they got confused, they went in the wrong direction, ran out of gas, ditched, and it's a huge ocean. None of the wreckage was found. That's the most reasonable explanation, but it's not fun. So I took this, and again, if you look at a movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, one of the first things you find is the Avenger planes in this desert in Mexico, perfectly preserved. And then famously at the end of the movie, the spaceship lands, opens up, and the aviators come out in their World War II era uniforms, and they haven't aged a day. So that was their answer. How the aliens or why would keep them, in suspended animation or something? Or there's no aging on this. That's never explained. It would have been kind of interesting if they were like old men, but whatever. But those are the sort of questions you ask when you introduce crypto-scientific theories and things from the real world into your fantasy RPG game. And so I answered all those questions. I thought about them and answered them in my PDF on the Lost Patrol concept. And then what's going to happen when they return? How do they feel about this? Do they remember their past life? Do they remember what happened in the other dimension? Because now you're thinking about the reality of this pseudoscientific thing. Just like, the reality of the Yeti or the Sasquatch in North America is, well, wait a minute, how can they get enough food to sustain themselves? They're that large. It wouldn't be as problematic in the Pacific Northwest where the Bigfoot, Sasquatch was. But then why have we found no corpses or anything? No one's ever, caught them on camera or whatever. Same thing with the giant shark, the Megalodon or whatever it is. None have ever been seen or found. Somebody would have caught one, right? You see great whites all the time. So you come up with pseudoscientific, they go so deep they're never seen, or the Sasquatch always bury their dead in a special place that no one can find. This is the issue. It's when you have magic, it's just magic. How can you foretell the future? Because I have a magic spell that does it and we're done. So the pseudoscientific always has some aspect that works in the physics, as it were, of the real world. And so, of course, you can have a Bermuda Triangle style area in your world where things randomly disappear. I mean, people wouldn't go there if it really were the case, or they would only go there if they had a really good reason. Or if the players, let's say, wanted to figure out what's going on there, what is driving this. Because if it's a phenomenon that's actually happening, there's a reason for it. There's a reason that things are disappearing, and the players are going to find out what it is. Some ancient artifact or some mechanical device, if it's a culture that used mechanisms or something, some kind of node that's out of whack or some curse or who knows what it could be, but there's a reason for it because it's working in this world, this fantasy world of magic and dimensions and powers and all this stuff and the divine intervention and all that. All those things are working together. And you're using, so of course in the bestiary we have Yetis and ghouls, and you can have a Bigfoot and whatever else, because you're just working them into the ecology, the architecture, as it were, of your world. But what you're doing is you're taking the interesting aspects of crypto science and zoology, which is an attempt to explain phenomenon with an out-of-the-box explanation, right? And you can have, a lot of people really object to the aliens I did a video on a real stinker, right? But I like aliens, again, in a limited way. One of the very first modules, Expedition to Barrier Peak, which Gygax used to introduce the Metamorphosis Alpha rules, was a sci-fi thing. They were always incorporating sci-fi. Why not? They loved sci-fi. And in a world like this, you would have aliens visiting all the time. They don't seem to be visiting us in the real world very often. But in an RPG fantasy, why not? Now, again, a lot of people just don't like, I don't like guns in my world. I just don't like them. I don't use them. But a lot of people, there's, many of the rule systems have elaborate rules for guns. They're simple guns, but they have them. Why? Because why not, people say. So I get that. And once you've incorporated them, then you got to think about, what would this impact be? So what I would suggest is go and do some research. Look into some of this crypto science. Look about, the Bermuda Triangle or some of these crypto monsters or some of these the ink of the drawings, the whole thing of alien astronauts, which was on the History Channel of all places now, I've seen recently. You can look into that. And the idea that the Incas could never have made these stone walls with rocks that there's no mortar. How could they fit these together? Well, they just did. But the idea was they were being held by aliens, and they had their landing craft. Why they made their landing zones look like birds and animals from up above, it's a mystery, right? But those are things that you can then incorporate, and you can have this ancient civilization that came down here at some point, or came through a dimensional door, taught these very primitive people a few things, or gave them, they have incredible medicine techniques, and they can do things, or they know how to make these healing potions that are unbelievably powerful from local mutagens, because they got this knowledge from this ancient society that came to them at some point in the past. And it all, ties up and makes sense in terms of the cave drawings, or, the art they have, or some artifacts. Again, in my example, I had these artifacts left by this troop that disappeared from an ancient time, and it gave clues as to what they were doing and when they went through this thing, what they were worried about and everything. And so that becomes part of this story that ties it together, but it sort of makes sense. That's maybe some things would get left behind, or some guys split off and said, I'm not going, or whatever it was, that it really happened. And I just love to use these kind of things. That's why I did it on my Patreon. And at this point, I do want to make a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Love doing this PDF and video on the Lost Patrol. Can't wait to make more stuff. Love to hear your comments. Give a like, dislike if you want. I'd love to hear what you think about this sort of crypto science, cryptozoology in your world. But most importantly, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.